So, J. Ruud, what lovable book are we talking about today?
Well, Stacey Margaret Jones, I'll give you a hint. The Youth.
Okay, I'll need more. All right, welcome to Between the Covers, where author J. Ruud and I, author Stacey Margaret Jones, discuss one entry each episode on J. Ruud's list of the 100 most lovable novels in the English language. So I am trying to guess the novel with these hints carefully designed for me not to guess the novel. Have I read this book?
I really don't know.
Oh, interesting. All right. Next hint, please.
Hint number 2, The Tall Soldier.
I got nothing.
All right, here's hint number 3, The Psychological Portrayal of Fear.
Now watch, I'll go around saying it's my favorite book ever. I don't know it. What is it?
The book is The Red Badge of Courage.
No, I have not read that.
Stephen Crane.
All right.
You didn't? You've never read that?
I'm about to get schooled. I have never read it. I think it was an option to read in a high school class, and I opted to read something else. So, who else likes this book?
Well, this book is on the College Board's list of 101 great books recommended for college-bound readers. It ranked as number 2 on the website Short Form's list of the 100 best war novels in world literature. It was number 58 on the Facts on File publication of the Novel 100, a ranking of the greatest novels of all time.
Facts on File?
Yep.
That is a former publisher of yours. You wrote many things for Facts on File. That's wonderful.
It came in as number 56 on the 2024 The Complete 500 list published by OCLC. Now, OCLC is a global library organization that ranked its books based on how many libraries have a copy of the book on their shelves.
Oh, okay.
So this is the 56th
interesting.
most commonly held book in libraries across the world.
That's a great way to measure that, because libraries have things that their patrons want to read or that are getting checked out, right? They hold those things because they're getting read.
Yep.
Oh, fascinating. I love it.
It came in as number 30 on the Guardian's list of the 100 greatest English language novels, and on the American Scholars list of 100 best American novels 1770 to 1985. The Red Badge of Courage was ranked as number 1.
Oh, goodness. All right. So it's lovable. I mean, it's admired and liked by other people.
Indeed.
Before we talk about why this book is lovable to you, why it made your list of lovable books, which I think is important, because this isn't a list like you should read this book if you're going to college or, literary canon books. These are books that in your vast experience as a scholar, but also as someone who loves to read, right? You've picked these books because they are enjoyable to read, right?
In one way or another.
In one way or another, even if they seem, some of them I'm like, why is this lovable? Is it so upsetting? But before we get into why you picked this book as lovable, can you give me the down and dirty summary? Will you earn the harps of glory or the trombone of utter defeat?
Well, we'll
each week it
soon
gets worse.
Find out.
The trombones get worse.
All right. It's pretty well known that this book is a fictionalized account of the experiences of one young private named Henry Fleming facing his first combat experience during the American Civil War.
Oh, I didn't even know it was Civil War, honestly.
Well, Henry's imagination is fired by romantic notions of glory and heroism, but he flees from the actual battle. The Confederate troops assault the Union position, but they're driven back, and when the enemy reforms and makes another attack, Henry sees some of his fellows run, and he flees himself, believing the battle's lost. When he reaches the rear of the Union army, however, he hears that the regiment he deserted has been victorious.
Oh.
So we follow him in what reads as a kind of distracted, aimless wandering for a while into the forest, and then he moves into a clearing where he joins a group of wounded soldiers retreating from the battle. And when they ask him where he's wounded, he evades the question. And finally, he flees from the column of wounded as well, and he runs into a disorderly retreating column of soldiers, one of whom, annoyed with him for getting in the way, smacks Henry in the head with the butt of his rifle, giving him a superficial but bloody head wound. And ultimately, Henry decides to try to get back to his own regiment, and when he does so, they're convinced that the gash on his head was sustained in battle, and they welcome him back. And I won't spoil the end of the book.
Is that the
in
summary?
case you haven't read it.
Okay.
That is the down and dirty summary.
Okay, I'll give you Harps of Glory. You almost went on too long. Nick of time. So.
And yeah.
All right.
I could have gone on.
I know, you always can. It's a summary, honey. It's a summary. All right. So how long is this book?
It is not very long. It's a quick read. It's about 150 pages, depending on what edition you'll get.
I'm looking for a novel to take on our trip to Ireland. Well, maybe. Since I have never read this book, maybe I should try it.
Maybe you should.
I guess
maybe this discussion will convince you one way or another.
Well, another contender is Demon Copperhead, so I'm not sure.
That's a good one.
But it's fascinating. I think I always thought it was World War I. But I don't, as I said, I haven't read it, and I don't know that much about it. I knew it was a war novel.
Yeah. Well, it was published in 1895.
So obviously.
Pre-World War I.
Not World War I. All right. And Stephen Crane. All right.
Stephen Crane is, in some ways, sort of the John Keats of American literature. He wrote a recognized classic, The Red Badge of Courage, when he was 24 years old. It made his international reputation. But Crane died of tuberculosis at the age of 28,
bless.
like Keats.
Oh, what a tragedy. I was mixing him up briefly in my mind with Hart Crane, who is different. He wrote that poem, Brooklyn Bridge. I think,
he's
right?
a whole nother
He's
guy.
a whole nother dude. All right, sorry both of you.
Of course, Crane actually was more famous than Keats in his own lifetime.
Oh, okay.
He was well known in the U.S. and in England, not only for his best-selling novel, but also for his private life. He had a kind of scandalous personal life. He was involved in liaisons with several women of perhaps questionable morals. So in some ways, he was also the Lord Byron of American literature.
He's two things.
Two things.
Well, interesting. All right. And he's American-born, American writer.
American-born.
And he got the consumption real bad.
He got it bad enough to kill him.
All right.
He died in 1900, and his reputation kind of plummeted after that. Mm-hmm. But then it was sort of rekindled in the 1920s through the admiration of people like H.G. Wells and Joseph Conrad and Henry James, all of whom admired him a great deal.
Was his reputation partly contingent on the idea of him as a wunderkind? Like, look at this young man, look what he's doing. And then he died, and they were like, oh, he's as old as you can be now.
I guess there wasn't much more there. Possibly, or it may have just been that people lost interest in books about the Civil War.
Oh, yeah, because there is a new era coming, right?
Yeah.
And we're in the industrial age now, and we're looking forward. And
we've had World War I, which is totally different. But, of course, Hemingway was inspired by The Red Badge of Courage. It was a major influence on Hemingway in Farewell to Arms, and then it also influenced Norman Mailer in The Naked and the Dead.
So is it famous and recommended and important because it pulls away the romantic view of war that people have who aren't in war? Because it doesn't sound particularly heroic.
No, it's not particularly heroic.
Because I think of Hemingway like that, too.
Yeah. But, I mean, Hemingway does believe in courage, and I think Stephen Crane does, too. But it's not It's not a simple thing. It's not something that just comes naturally.
And war is really scary, muddy, bloody, awful.
Yeah, and the people reading this book kind of got that.
Yeah.
But they were shocked when they learned that it had been written by a 24-year-old who was born 6 years after the Civil War ended.
Where was he born?
They thought he was, a veteran.
Where was he born?
Well, he was from the North.
Okay, because we know about the romanticized Civil War of the South.
Yeah.
Interesting.
He first became interested in writing a book like this by reading accounts that were published in magazines and things that kind of interviewed famous officers or soldiers who had survived the war and what they had to say about what they did. Mm-hmm. And he said, it's crazy because all they did was simply describe the events and their actions completely objectively. And he said, I wonder that some of these fellows don't tell how they felt in those scraps. And he also said they spout enough of what they did, but they're as emotionless as rocks. And so he resolved that he was going to write his own novel, which he intended, he said, to depict the psychological portrayal of fear.
So he was going to open up the interior experience of the soldiers. Yeah. Because they weren't doing that themselves.
Exactly. And then he did interview a number of soldiers before he wrote this to get
I hope so.
into what they were feeling, because they never talked about that.
Then he was able to ask them questions.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Qualitative research.
Exactly.
That's fascinating.
That's what he did.
Yeah.
And it was
Me too.
very successful. But to slide into that question of what's lovable about the book, it is maybe the first time that you get a book about war that focuses on the emotions of a single soldier who's going through these things.
Okay.
How exactly he feels about everything.
Mm-hmm. What had there been novels about wars? Well, obviously there were, but they were grander perspectives or multi-character novels or
and talked about the sort of, I guess, the great historical events. You look at Tolstoy's War and Peace.
Right.
It's all about the strategy of the general and the defeat of Napoleon's forces as they come into Russia and are caught by the Russian winter, but that's what happens to the entire army.
Right. It's not one.
It doesn't focus on a single individual.
What the army is actually made of.
Yeah.
Well, you can trace, I could see that you could, not just Hemingway, but also then you'd have Tim O'Brien.
Sure.
Which is definitely in that tradition.
Yeah, yeah. Also Joseph Heller.
Oh, sure.
Catch-22. All of those books owe a debt to Stephen Crane.
But it's also interesting to me because he doesn't pick somebody who did something and got a medal for it, or this guy is like skirting the exterior of the battle, trying not to be killed. Yeah. And then just slides in with this strange wound and moves on.
Yeah, the wound.
He's not a heroic figure.
You got to read to the end of the book.
Okay. But I'm saying, what in terms of the plot as you have outlined it, it doesn't sound propagandistic.
No, but he's been through the battle the first time. Mm-hmm. And he spends a lot of the very first part of the book, he's wondering how he's going to stand up when the battle starts. And if he's going to face up to it, or if he's going to be heroic, or if he's going to run.
I suppose that's an incredibly universal and also very individual process, right? Yeah. Most, you'd have 1,000, 2,000, 10,000 soldiers. They're all going to be thinking their own thoughts in that vein, but unique to them.
Yeah, yeah.
So you can choose one to follow.
Yeah.
Right? Oh, that's interesting.
But it's interesting that Henry is the central consciousness of the book. It's a third-person narrative, but he's the one whose mind you're in all the time. As the narrator is talking about what he's thinking. The narrator always calls him the youth. He never uses his name. And
it's not first person?
No. Oh. And when he's talking to one of his friends, it's the tall soldier or the loud soldier. So those are what their names are, because when the dialogue is reported,
you hear them. It's like you're overhearing.
Yeah. And you hear him called Henry.
So it's a way of simultaneously humanizing and dehumanizing them.
Well, or focusing on the individual and also on the universal.
Yes, that's better said. That's better said.
Because the characters are sort of, I suppose, archetypal in a sense.
Right.
They are universal. They are the soldiers who are always there, and these are the soldiers. So it could be, if focusing just on the feelings of the protagonist, it could be somebody soaring the beaches at Normandy. It could be a French soldier facing the English archers at Agincourt. It could be anybody at any time who's taking part in a war and maybe facing battle for the first time and wondering how they're going to react.
Right. Because that's a way of putting the reader in the midst of the action, right?
Yeah.
Because you can read it and think, what would I be thinking? What would I do? How would I stand up?
Yeah,
and I can use this character as a proxy, right? Or, to think about it, but not have to go through.
The details of the novel, of course, make you know it's the Civil War, even though the feelings of the soldier could be universal.
Sure.
And most scholars have decided from the details that Crane includes that the battle described as Chancellorsville, which was April 30th to May 6th, 1863, which was a major victory for the Confederate Army.
Oh, okay.
Although in Crane's novel, it seems like the Union side is victorious, or at least they think they're victorious.
I suppose it would be incredibly confusing. They don't have, like we do, they can't amass communications instantly from all over.
Yeah, and if there's tens of thousands of them in all these many different regiments, it's pretty hard to tell.
That would be
exactly what's happening or who's winning.
You might feel like you won, and then they tell you, no, we lost that.
Yeah.
Or vice versa.
And you get this image from the beginning of war as an animal, as Henry's thinking about the enemy attack in the beginning. It says they were going to look at war, the red animal war, the blood-swollen god, and they were deeply engrossed in this march. And that image of war as an animal
it's very
goes
poetic
through the book. It's
the theme.
Yeah.
Motif.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, why? I mean, you've talked about this, but how would you kind of boil it down to what made you put this on your list?
It's the way that you can identify with Henry so vividly. You can understand what makes him run, and you can understand what makes him ashamed that he ran, and you can understand how he feels when he's in that group of men who've been wounded because they've got a symbol of their courage that everyone can see, and he doesn't. And when he's looking at this group of men who are retreating because they're wounded, at times he regarded the wounded soldiers in an envious way. He conceived persons with torn bodies to be particularly happy. He wished that he too had a wound, a red badge of courage.
I was going to ask about the title.
That's where it comes from.
Well, that's also very poetic. I mean, you could see this. You were talking about Keats and Byron, and it is poetic, right?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously that's a symbol. It's a motif of the book. It's a way of representing something emotional on the page without, spelling it out directly and wrecking it for the reader, right?
Yeah.
Like, here's what you should think about this.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. Especially, I think that's powerful in a short novel, right?
Yeah.
Because short novels are, in some ways, more like poetry because each word counts a little more, right? Each sentence counts in its own way to create that emotional experience that you would build over a long time in a longer, epic novel, right?
Yeah.
Is this novel, is it a quest story, or how would you categorize it? Coming of age?
It's a coming of,
Okay.
it is a coming of age novel, I would say.
Okay.
Because by the end, you think maybe he's matured.
Sure.
Because he's back with his own fictional regiment. And he has this attitude of being the sort of veteran already, having been through the first trial of his courage.
Well, I suppose many people don't become veterans in that way because they're killed in their first battle.
Yeah. So, you have the maturation of a soldier, although some people think, it's not the maturation of the soldier, it's the whole story is ironic, and so it's really the self-deception of a soldier who thinks he's matured. and by the end,
That's kind of Inception there.
Yeah. By the end, he's thinking like all soldiers about how useless their officers are.
Oh, well, there you go. He's arrived.
How dumb the general is. There's one sentence where the shadows of the woods were formidable. He was certain that in this vista there lurked fierce-eyed hosts. The swift thought came to him that the generals did not know what they were about. It was all a trap. Suddenly those close forests would bristle with rifle barrels.
Well, it could be one of those things. It also sounds like it's just acculturation.
Yeah.
He's a new person in this environment, in this society with its own values, right?
Yeah.
Explicit and implicit, and he's feeling his way through what everything means and how to belong, and what are the beliefs of the society, the new society.
And the beliefs of his society are that the generals are incompetent.
Yep.
Which is probably universal.
Yep. Especially if you lose.
Toward the end of the novel, there's one officer in particular who tells his company to go and, they're supposed to go and secure a place. And then he hears him talking to some other officer about they're just a bunch of mule drivers. And he really resents this guy. And these happenings had occupied an incredibly short time, Crane says, yet the youth felt that in them he had been made aged. So he feels he's matured.
The youth felt he had been made aged.
Yeah.
See, that's a line from a poem.
Yeah.
You can see the writing is
It's very poetic.
Like, it just sounds very carefully crafted in that way.
Yeah. New eyes were given to him, and the most startling thing was to learn suddenly that he was very insignificant. The officer spoke of the regiment as if he referred to a broom. Some part of the woods needed sweeping, perhaps. So he's just a bristle in a broom to the officers. He's so completely insignificant.
And replaceable.
Yeah.
If your bristle gets shot, you can get another bristle. Oh, my goodness. Wow. How is this book still taught a lot, or is it fading a little bit? Or
I think it still gets taught quite a bit in high schools. It is, it's not a difficult reading level. I think, junior high would have no difficulty reading it. Understanding it,
I was going to say, I think you'd want to be a little older than that for some of the themes, obviously.
Yeah. Also, I think it's hard for somebody that age to to recognize what really distinguishes Crane as a writer, and that's his impressionistic style.
Oh, okay.
That is so easily seen in this very internal contemplation of the stuff that's going on.
Yeah. It sounds beautifully written.
There's this sense that the natural world is completely indifferent to human beings, and which is a theme that's pretty consistent with the naturalism as a literary movement,
right?
And Crane is lumped usually with Jack London and Frank Norris as the chief naturalistic writers.
Right.
But what distinguishes him from them is this impressionistic style.
Right.
Here's a paragraph.
Okay.
That illustrates his style. It's impressionistic. It's filled with color and metaphor, and it's a depiction of the external world colored by the inner psyche.
Okay.
The ground was cluttered with vines and bushes, and the trees grew close and spread out like bouquets. He was obliged to force his way with much noise. The creepers, catching against his legs, cried out harshly as their sprays were torn from the barks of the trees. The swishing saplings tried to make known his presence to the world. He could not conciliate the forest. As he made his way, it was always calling out protestations. When he separated embraces of trees and vines, the disturbed foliages waved their arms and turned their face leaves toward him. He dreaded lest these noisy motions and cries should bring men to look at him. So he went far, seeking dark and intricate places. This is from where he's, going through the forest after he's retreated. But everything in the forest is alive and is reacting to him.
Yeah. And it goes along with my perception that the nature will kill you and won't think twice. No regrets. Well, and maybe we've talked about that before in the podcast, but that was how I felt in Antarctica, was that nature was so vast and so powerful and so indifferent. The planet itself.
Yeah.
To us, whether we're there or not.
Yeah. Although this forest doesn't seem indifferent. It seems like it's out to grab him.
Right. Either indifferent or malevolent.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, yeah, this is, I'm glad we talked about this because obviously I've always heard of this book. But not having read it, I just knew it was a war book. And I guess I thought of it as a kind of male coming of age.
And it is.
Okay, there you go.
There is no woman character in it. He thinks about his mother and things like that. But,
right.
But
well, yeah, because they're not going to have,
Captain
so-and-so is not a woman.
No, not at this time.
The medic isn't a woman.
Not at this point.
His colleague fighting in the trenches, not a woman.
The loud soldier is not a woman.
Not a woman.
The tall
that would
soldier
be
is
the
not
woman
a
soldier.
That's right.
The woman said. All right, well, who might not like this book?
I think women might be bored with it sometimes. Well,
it's short, so your boredom won't last long.
That's right. But I think students who read it too early will have a bad memory of it.
Yeah, because
it's not.
Things are going on, but you don't know they're going on because you're too young to understand.
Yeah.
So then it seems like nothing's going on.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
So it can be lumped in with all those 19th century American novels like Moby Dick that you have bad memories of.
Does it have a chapter on whale blubber?
It does not have a chapter on the whiteness of the whale.
All right. Well, where are you going to rank this lovable novel on your list?
I'm putting it at number 34.
Okay.
So right after The Things They Carried, they sort of occupy a similar spot in my head.
Yeah, I can see why. What's below it?
Right before The Color Purple, which has no relationship to it at all. It's just...
Right. Interesting. Okay. Well, Good job. That was a good conversation on this book. I needed to have that because I had a very, very, very incorrect gloss of what this book was about.
Yes.
So, all right.
Okay. Well, I believe then that it must be time for Chaos Reader.
That was a new one. All right. Well, I'm going to check in on my Nixon book because I just started it. So you and I have a rule that you can't say you started a book until you've read 100 pages. And you can say you're finishing a book if you're within 100 pages of the end, right?
Yeah. So for instance, The Red Badge of Courage, you could be starting it and finishing it at the same time.
Exactly. You could be finishing it before you're starting it.
That's true. You would be finishing it 50 pages before you started it.
Exactly, which is always fun. I have started my Richard Nixon biography by John Farrell, and I really like it. It's really well written, and you feel like he's... I mean, obviously, if you know anything about Nixon, you wouldn't be surprised by this, but if it were a novel, he would be the anti-hero. I mean, the biographer is not, he has an objective biographical tone. It's not a hit piece. I don't think you need to approach Nixon to hit. Like, he'll take care of that for you, right?
Yeah.
And he talks a lot about his positive traits, how you can see already in the first 100 pages how he gets ahead because of his, he works really hard. He's incredibly bright. He's persistent. But he also, I think there's a first chapter about how he wins his first race for Congress and says things that are untrue about his opponent, that he knows are untrue, that he has no regret or remorse about saying about his opponent. And even admitted to the opponent, at a lunch later on. Well, I had to say that. I had to win. And you can also see the notes of his insecurity and sensitivity that flare in not good ways the more power he gets, I think we think that the more power we get or influence or success, the less we're going to be insecure. But if you don't manage it right, it just means that your insecurities flare and you have fewer guardrails for your behavior.
Yeah.
So I think I like the way the book was set up because at first I was kind of like, well, is this not a biography his whole life? Because it starts with that race. He's already married or he gets married quickly. And I was like, well, okay. But then after that race is covered, then the biographer goes back and covers his birth, his early life. And I think that was a really great decision because his entry into political life shows kind of his whole career, in that microcosm. And like I said, the biographer shares a lot of kind of positive traits about him. Pat Nixon also is a fascinating person, makes me want to read about her and how she really chafed at the constraints of being a young wife and mother and a political wife and mother when she'd been she was an orphan, a literal orphan, and she'd been which meant she was very independent, right? Mm. And so to be married and be a Washington wife at this time and mother, I think didn't suit. And a lot of times when he was gone, I think she felt like, oh, okay, I can do my own thing, right? It's just, they seem very interesting people. And then before we go on, I don't want to talk about this too long, but apparently John F. Kennedy knew Nixon when they're both early in Congress and had a lot of respect for him and liked talking to him because Nixon was so educated, so well-read, and a bright and interesting conversationalist. And Kennedy was like, oh, we need more men like him in government, right? Mm. And so fascinating in those when they first knew each other, what was going to come later on, right? My perception is that Kennedy's persona exacerbated Nixon's insecurities, right? Mm. But early on, when they were both equal, right, then they... he felt free to be friends with them. They were invited to Kennedy's wedding, right? So I think that this is why I love reading presidential biographies, because you can see, you know, the span of their lives, not just the things they're known for. You know, the one act, right, that defines their kind of reputation, etc. So it's very interesting, and so I just wanted to report now that I'm starting. N-I-X-N-I-X-N-I-X-O-N.
That was his campaign song.
Yeah.
In 1960. It was to the tune of the Mickey Mouse Club.
Right. And I was thinking, of course, about the Mad Men episode when they are working for Nixon, because, of course, they are. Anyway, reading presidential biographies is a really good way to read American history because you have a central character, right? I mean, we were talking about the Red Badge of Courage. You have one person that you're following in this huge, epic story of a nation.
Yeah.
And that's why I like this project. And this is the first presidential biography that I have read of a president from my lifetime. So I'm getting there. It's exciting.
Wow.
Yeah. So I will probably talk about this book again because it's really well written.
And it's long. So
it's not that long. It's 558 pages. So it's not, I mean, it has tons of notes. It looks like a big old book, but it's not that long.
All right.
All right. Well, we'd like to thank our producing sensei, Jerry Bruno, who also produces the cover art for the YouTube, which every week, which we really do appreciate. And we'd also like to thank our listeners worldwide and all of our listeners who listen to the podcast, who comment, who send me texts. Please share the podcast with your friends and neighbors and book-loving family, etc. And we will see you next time between the covers.